One. Doing okay.
Hi, I'm Betty Jo Ray, and welcome to the City Minute. Today I'm pleased to have with me in the studio Gary Williams from Williams & Fudge. This is a wonderful opportunity to have to talk with you.
Thank you.
Gary, first of all, let's talk about where you were born and just a little bit about your life here.
Well, I was born in Georgia, spent my early years in Memphis, and then grew up in Charlotte. So very much from the area since I was about 10 years old.
Right. And what got you to Rock Hill?
Well, we opened the Putt-Putt Golf Course.
Didn't realize that.
1975, I built it and operated it until 1983, and a lot of the city leaders, community leaders were some of my kids growing up out there. Jim Reno worked for me. Dean Fell, assistant head of the chamber, he was out there. He and Millie met out there and married. So Merritt, King, a lot of the friends that are now leaders. So we had a great time in those younger days.
Do you know where the first Putt-Putt golf course was?
Well, there was one on Cherry Road. Was there one before that?
There was one right on Main Street where the old Bank of America is, that building across over here from the studio. Gary, let's talk about the excitement that you have going on with your company and what you're doing for Rock Hill. I think this is so exciting. And we can go back a little bit on the history too, if you want to start there.
The history of Williams & Fudge?
Well, let's do that. Let's do that, and then we'll go back to the cotton factory.
Well, we're real pleased. Our growth has been tremendous in the last few years. We've been averaging 25, 30% growth. Williams & Fudge, we're a 21-year-old company, almost 21 years old. We collect delinquent student loans and receivables for colleges and universities. We work for over 700 colleges around the country. We have colleges in 40-some states. So we have 190 employees presently. And this past year, we collected over $65 million of your tax dollars. So these are all federal and state tax dollars, and they all go back to the campus. So that's really thrilling that we can save some tax dollars and do a great job for our community with that.
And you've grown so much that you had something exciting that went off in your mind. So let's talk about that.
We have. A couple years ago, Mayor came to me and said, Gary, let's talk about moving downtown. You know, his son, Chad Eccles, is our corporate attorney. And he had heard a lot about Williams & Fudge, obviously, through his son and everything, because we sort of stay low-key in town. And he called, and we had lunch, and he talked about moving downtown, building a building, everything. I said, I'm absolutely not interested. There wasn't enough space, and with 190 employees, you require a lot of parking, which is limited. About a month later, I went to Duke University, which is one of our clients, and they had informed us they moved their support staff off campus. We went, they said, well, they're downtown in the old cotton warehouses, or excuse me, tobacco warehouses. So I went down there, and I was thinking, what a dump they've moved them to. And I walked in there, it's the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. And they were in the old Lucky Strike warehouses. And really Durham has done a great job of bringing back their inner city. So I came back and I called Doug and I said, let's talk. And so we started talking, and he said, well, we have the old cotton factory over here. And I looked at it, and you know, it's been ugly for a long time.
It has been.
So I said, okay, well, let's talk. So we got city manager and Stephen Turner all involved. We walked in there, and the first few months we walked in there, you had to have a flashlight. Everybody had to have a flashlight because it was dark 30 in there. I mean, it was dark and all. But we started seeing the dream and sit down with Rock Hill Economic Development Corporation and moved ahead from there.
That's just great. Well, let's talk some about the history of the mill itself, the building and what happened there.
It's been really exciting to learn. I'm a history buff, always have been. And 1881 is when it first opened. Now you realize that's a 125-year-old structure over there, the original structure over there. A lot of our, after the Civil War, as I've learned history, after the Civil War, the industrialized North did not think much of what was left of the South. I think they sort of had the Southern white gentleman as someone who, you know, couldn't do anything without the black slaves, and they looked at the African American citizens as just sort of lazy because they'd been slaves all their lives and they didn't know what to do. Well, the South was catching up with them, and it took a while to rebuild after the carpetbaggers and all left and the communities rebuilding. Rock Hill was blessed with a group of young men coming to town that had visions. So in 1880, A.C. Hutchinson incorporated it. His board of directors, I wrote them down so I wouldn't miss any of them. Captain Hutchinson, who was A.E. Hutchinson, who is Hiram Hutchinson's, our current Hiram Hutchinson's grandfather, Chip Hutchinson's great-grandfather, was one of the founding partners of it. A.H. White, all the old Rock Hill family names. W.L. Roddy, J.R. London, Johnny London, Fuel, John Gill, and F.J. Pelzer. That's the only non-Rock Hill name I don't recognize. But they incorporated, sold $100,000 worth of stock at $100 a share. That was a lot of money.
Yeah, back then.
And Rock Hill was a very small community. Obviously, it's near downtown, and it was built right in the cotton field. The reason they chose that location because 2 railroads crossed there, and we know from where the train station existed. And unfortunately, I moved to Rock Hill the year after it was tore down.
It was so beautiful.
And my dad was with Southern Railway 43 years, so I'm a train guy. But the tracks where they crossed, the Ohio to Charleston route and the Southern Railway route, which went from Atlanta to Richmond or on up to Washington, they crossed right there. And prior to 1880, the leadership sort of said, well, you cannot grow anymore because a mule can only pull so far. And I said, what was the expression? Something about as long as a mule's legs is how much Rock Hill could grow, and that was about 15 miles. So they had to have more ways to bring in cotton. They had to have more ways to get it out of town. So when the tracks were brought in, and of course Templeton Black gave the land for the tracks to come through.
Right.
And so it all progressed, and young men wanted to do something to grow beyond just just growing cotton. So they incorporated again in 1880, opened in 1881 with 100 employees, women and children mostly.
And what did they do? What did they produce?
Well, they were spinning. They were not doing any weaving until 1894, but they were mostly spinning, making rope, making shirting, sheeting, things like that is mostly what they were doing. An unfortunate past of ours is there were a lot of children working there, 8, 10, 12-year-old brothers and sisters that couldn't even go to school. But I think one of the exciting parts, it's possible that this factory was the first steam-powered factory in the Southeast, but it definitely was in South Carolina because it was 5 miles from the river, and they had not figured out how to get any kind of energy away from the river because the Carolinas are blessed with good timber, good people, good labor, cheap labor, and good water systems to generate electricity. So they made it steam powered. It was steam powered from 1881 to 1894, and when it connected on to, I believe, Mr. Cherry owned the electrical system prior to selling it to the city in 1895. It was Mr. Cherry or one of the other. I'm not sure of that, but it was steam powered, and it became a model for a lot of steam powered plants away from the river. Throughout the Southeast. So it really has a lot of great history with it.
Right. Well, I noticed you brought some wonderful tools that a lot of the people that work there, you're so fortunate to have been able to find these.
Well, we put out a call in December and we got a couple calls. But a gentleman, 87-year-old gentleman, Mr. C.M. Baker, brought this to me a few weeks ago. He said, I have not opened this since 1948. He worked at an industrial mill and he worked at the old cotton factory. Gotex. It was Gotex from the 20s until the 60s, I guess. He said he had put this in his storage room in 1948, had not opened it. So he'd opened it when he saw the article in the newspaper, and he brought it to me. He says, "You probably don't want this old junk." And I'm going, wow. I mean, it was a treasure chest. And he had his own personal tools in here. He showed me some of the tools at first, and he laughed a little bit, and he said, and I've got to show you this first. And it's an old Two Bros can. People remember snuff, and I remember my grandmother, and we used it when we got stung and everything else. He said, but there's not tobacco in it. So I opened it. He said, open it up. I did. And I said, what is that white powder? And today scares us. I said, what is that? And he said, it's soda. He said, you don't even know what that's used for. And I died laughing because I remember mother coming in when she was having stomach gas and all and go, I got to have some soda.
Got to have some soda.
Now we just put it in the refrigerator and
Yeah.
deodorize it. But he said that's been in there since 1948. And he said if you worked in a mill, you had to have soda. But he had all kind of beautiful tools. He showed me how the looms worked and everything. But he had all kind of beautiful tools that his parents had made.
That's what you said.
And
That's
you know
so
these are
interesting.
reeds, and they're used to pull the string when it broke to keep the everything running. But these were handmade.
It's amazing.
Aren't they beautiful? Handmade by his dad
Yeah, they're
and
lovely.
his mom. They both worked at industrial as well. Of course, you know, multiple generations worked in it, but he brought me all the tools. He said, you probably don't want these old things, but there's so few of them left.
They are treasures.
And most of them were made out of plastic.
Yeah.
But these were actually handmade. When the looms were, if they were all up and running, then they could work on something like this. So this
Right.
this was their Red Mac tool chest kind of thing of that day.
Absolutely.
One more thing he
What
showed me.
treasures.
I said, well, what's this chalk for? And he had 3 things of chalk, and he showed me on the piece of paper that he did. He said, well, if there was a flaw in the fabric, you didn't get paid. He said, so here's what everybody did. They first would put white chalk on it, and he said, you get that from the schoolhouse. And then he used blue chalk, and then he used yellow chalk. And he says, you rub it all in, and then just take the fabric here and run it smooth. He said, when the inspectors went by, they didn't see it.
They didn't see
So I'm
it.
thinking, okay, when it was first washed is probably when they saw it. But that's the way everybody, because they only got paid if they did flawless fabric.
Is that not something?
So, but he had all his tools, and of course you could spend hours looking at them.
Oh, they're wonderful.
He had a comb in there that they combed everything out with, extra chalk. But it was really interesting. He got paid 25 cents an hour. But if the loom wasn't working, you didn't get paid.
Didn't get paid.
So it was really nice talking with him, along with just a couple other people that called. It'd really be neat, though. Anything we can preserve, we're going to contract with hopefully the Culture and Heritage Commission to help us because
good.
they're charged with preserving the culture and heritage.
Are
And
you sort of going to have like a history thing in the entrance?
I'm going to try having that in the. We're going to have a foyer area. And try having an entrance there with different artifacts that we can
Right.
find, pictures all around. Some of the
Super.
old Rock Hill pictures. I've been in contact with Claudie Moore,
Yeah, great.
and he's got a great set. So love about sharing the history of Rock Hill.
Good. Before we go on, let's take a quick break. You're watching the City Minute, and we're talking with Gary Williams, who's doing an exciting project for the city of Rock Hill and himself. Welcome back to the City Minute. If you're just joining us today, we're talking with Gary Williams with Williams and Fudge and the wonderful, exciting project that they're doing downtown. A lot of people know it as Old Pledges Building,
Right.
but it really had another name to start off with.
It did. It was called the Cotton Factory, the Rock Hill Cotton Factory, 1881, as we've talked earlier. By 1887, other mills were starting to be built. Mr. Ivy had expanded because he was one of the founders and supplied most of the cotton. He went, Mr. London, they all started creating other mills. So they called it the Old Cotton Factory. So that was the name that stuck with it for a long time. Then Gotex came in, I guess in the late 20s, early 30s. And it was called Gotex until Pledges came in. And so most people now call it the Old Pledges Building because we all bought towels and sheets and everything else in there for a long time.
That's exactly right. But actually, over the years, they made very, very different kinds of things.
That they did. And so when we incorporated, we call it the Old Cotton Factory.
Good.
So
That's
just to
great.
bring back some old name, and that'll be the name on the outer brickwork on the street corner of the building.
Right. Now, Gary, you have brought some pictures of your plans of what y'all are going to do. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, we're going for historical tax credits, which helps us make the building feasible. Otherwise, we could not build it. So we're having to work with the State Department of Archives as well as the Department of the Interior, the National Park Service. So they have to approve everything we do. And one of their items is a benchmark date. So we picked 1921 as a benchmark date because we had a picture of the Hampton Carhartt mill. We all know about Carhartt clothing line that's still around, the little yuppie clothing line that is out there today. But Hampton Carhartt actually added onto the bill in 1905, the center and the left section, and modernized it. And he owned the mill from 1905 to 1921 when there was a big Depression. So we've taken the picture from 1921, and except for the water tower, we're going to make it look just like that picture did in 1921.
Great.
It's going to be we started painting it this week, just a sample section, but it's going to be a red brick similar to the Wachovia Bank building downtown. And we're putting back in 314 white windows.
I noticed that.
And
We're watching the windows going in.
We've got one in right now. It's a sample that the federal government had to see. But there's 314 of them being put in, and most of them are a standard 254, I think, or one size.
I was going to ask you if you had to find somebody different to make those.
They're all being custom made.
Yeah.
And they're going to be modern. They're going to be thermopaned and everything, but they're going to look like they did, because we have pictures, and you might see a close-up of one that has got ladies in frilly dresses, out the window just waving and everything and all. So we're making it look like we're going to put a courtyard in the center section where the old loading dock was. We're putting a beautiful courtyard in with individual brick pavers, and we're going to do a piece of art. I'm real excited about this.
I had sort of heard that, so I think that's exciting.
We've committed 1% of our total budget to a public piece of art.
Right.
We've got a committee formed now to help us, including Harriet Good and Terry Plum. Tom Stanley's worked with us from Winthrop. We've got a consultant from Charlotte, and we're going to commission this piece and hopefully have it in. But we want to do this as our commitment to the city, my partners and I, and then encourage City Council to look at making it a strong encouragement, if you will, to other new, because the textile corridor is getting ready to take off.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's just our history. That's what we were, and we need to preserve that. And you and I talked about how important it is to preserve that, and I think you were telling me about a place up in North Carolina where they're really trying hard.
They're trying to preserve it, and Coolmamy, I believe it's called, between Salisbury and Statesville. It's an old mill town, and of course there used to be 17 million spindles in this area. Southern Railway served 75% of them, so they're all near the railroad line. And of course, most of the mills are gone now, and we've watched what's happening to Springs Global right now with everything going overseas. But the mills were a town, they were a village, they were people, they were in this together, they had strong values together. Hampton Carhart built a beautiful community here. It was just, it's heritage that's leaving us. It's important to preserve.
That's right. We'll be back in just a moment with more of the City Minute. Welcome back to our discussion with Gary Williams with Williams and Fudge, and we're talking about the exciting things that they're doing at, well, a lot of people call it the old pledges, but now we will change it to the cotton factory.
The old cotton factory.
And Gary, talk about what's inside, what it looks like inside.
The inside just is beautiful. It's 1881 wood, oak, maple, and we sandblasted it, brought it back to its original colors. We're leaving it natural. There's a lot of nail holes. There's a lot of, around the bottom, there's a lot of damage from the dollies that were all hit it for 100 and some years. Up on our floor, we have a clear story, which is another floor that you don't see because there's windows. There's 4-foot windows all the way down the center of the building. This was a steam-powered plant, and of course, most mills were powered by a center drive axle from the ceiling, and the belts hung down. So we're preserving the actual boats were still up there, all the drive shafts gone, but we're going to use that to put our technology trays in.
Neat.
We're painting the walls a shade of brown because, again, that brick's 125 years old and it's really crumbly, so we're having to seal it on both sides. The floors will just be sanded. Anybody knows anything about a weave spinning room, all the little travelers that fall out from where you try holding the spinning process, they're all in the floor. Some of them been there obviously 125 years. We're just going to lightly sand the floor. You're going to see a lot of old wood, a lot of old type of marks and markings in the floor. And we're just going to seal it back with a light coat of maple and then polyurethane to protect it a little bit. But it's going to be as natural as we can have it with a lot of history, as much as we can find. And that's why I appeal to the citizens, if they have something, even if it's a picture, a pay stub, anything that we can preserve.
Well, you're just doing a wonderful job over there, and everybody in Rock Hill certainly should appreciate what you're doing, and everyone that has a history of the old mills ought to be really excited about what you're doing. And so what's the time date?
We're still shooting for late May
Good.
of '07. So we're, getting the windows in. We can get the heat on. A lot of work's going on. The parking lot's already being graded. We're have it surveyed, so we're moving ahead. Exciting part too, it had an old train track, with a siding to it. We've taken up the track. We're going to change the grade, but we're going to put the track back down right at the asphalt level. So you'll be able to see the train track coming
Right,
back out to say, I was important, but your car will go over it smoothly. But we're trying to preserve as much heritage inside and outside. We will landscape it.
That's great.
We've committed to the city 20-some 3.5-inch caliber trees. So we're excited about how it's going to look and hopefully be the start of a real growth for downtown Rock Hill.
Absolutely. Well, you certainly are making that happen, and it's really exciting. I ride by there every day, and I think, oh, this is just so great. And to start to see the windows going in now, it's so great. Do you have to replace all those windows along that top?
The top area,
too.
because the windows were still there, we have to repair them.
Okay.
These are 125-year-old windows that we'll replace some glass, but we just have to caulk them and paint them and hope they'll exist, because that's part of
right.
our heritage preservation is
Right.
whatever we can preserve that's there will stay there.
That's super. Well, everybody, I'm sure, in Rock Hill is really watching what's going on, and we really thank you for making that commitment.
It's a great
And
town to
look
raise a family
forward.
and now raise grandchildren.
Well, thank you, Gary. And thank you so much for being a part of all the things that happen here in Rock Hill and being such a giver back. That's really important. And you've certainly done that since you've been here, and
Thank you for your
making
leadership.
a great gift back to us now. And we thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
that.
You inspired us in the 80s, and I still remember when we were shutting everything down and you provided that leadership, you and Joe,
Well.
and said, let's make Rock Hill a future, and y'all set a good foundation for us. Thank
Well,
you.
It was fun to do. It was fun to do. Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have.